I'll try to make a few closing remarks. It seems like such a long time since I got up here this morning, but it's certainly been a wonderful day. So while I'm making a few concluding remarks, I wonder if you want to think about your kind of concluding thoughts, your comments, or even questions for some of our panelists, because our reception out in the atrium will start at 6 o'clock, and so we will have a few. 5:30? Oh, we're sure it's 5:30. Okay, it's going to start at 5:30, so I won't talk very long, and we'll get to go out there in about 15 minutes. But if you have a concluding thought or question, make sure that you kind of keep it in mind. You know, all this kind of discussion of grandmothers today made me, I was sitting here thinking not just about my own grandmother, but I was thinking about a few years ago working on a kind of an oral history project back in Minneapolis, where I had kind of this wonderful assignment to write a book about Ojibwe women of the Great Lakes, any time period, you know, way back from the fur trade up to the present. And it was kind of an intimidating project for me because historians like to study very particular periods of time and be experts on a little period of time. And so this was sort of a challenge for me. And the documents, the historical documents, were kind of thin when it came to contemporary women. So I went out with my graduate students, as I often do, and we kind of developed an oral history project for women in Minneapolis. And what I said started talking to people in the community about what I was doing, and I said, I want you to tell me, you know, I said to various women in the community, who the real leaders are in our community. I'm not going to decide this myself by who I think are the influential figures of kind of the times in which we live, but I want women in the community to tell me who I should go out and interview. And this was our method, right? So we just listened to people in the community, and they said, well, you know, what about such and such? She's been devoted her life to this topic. And one name that I kind of heard again and again and again was a woman named Rose Robinson, who was from up on, by this time, living on the Leech Lake Reservation. And she was really very instrumental in the passage of the Indian Child Welfare Act. And during the course of this research, I discovered, wow, there are all these women in Minneapolis who, even though often there's a senator who's often given credit for that legislation, it really was the women in the Indian community in Minneapolis, many of them, who did all the groundwork and did the research and so forth for the passage of the Indian Child Welfare Act. And I thought how interesting it was that these women were kind of creating new forms of white-collar labor in the process, you know, in the 70s and 80s. So this was fascinating. So I went up to Leech Lake on my way to Red Lake and told Rose Robinson, I'm going to come in, you know, with my equipment and my graduate students, and we're going to interview you. And she was like, why would you want to interview me? You know, she was just stunned, and she's such a wonderful person. But she really has devoted her life to this work on Indian child welfare. But there's a story that she told about her own grandmother that I thought was kind of an inspirational one, and I just thought I'd read you a little quick excerpt here. Anyway, she talked about how she'd gone through, as many of us have, difficult periods in our careers. And she said there was a time when she had to quit working for the Leech Lake Band in the 1980s. She said she was discouraged, had grown very discouraged over political issues. She felt that progress was stalled and that she just couldn't do the work any further. She felt like the team of women working for the tribe who are writing and receiving grants were not being respected, that they were not being recognized for their hard work, even by their Ojibwe colleagues. And she said this was just wrong. We should be respected by our colleagues. But what she said kind of pulled her through this very difficult time was remembering her own father's experience working for the tribe, traveling to Washington a generation earlier, and how he had always gone to seek out the best possible source for advice at home, which was his own elderly mother. So Robinson drew strength from the example of her father's reliance on his mother and on what she called the historical position of respect for female elders. And so this is just one of the little, among many of the stories she said. So she says, before he went to Washington, D.C. that time, he went and sat with my grandma for hours before he went. She spoke Ojibwe. I don't know what they talked about, but he made sure he went to talk with her before he went. She was very sharp, and she knew how things should be. She wasn't mean to anybody but her husband. Laughter. Then she said, no, she was not mean. She was very firm. She'd say, you can't be doing that in Ojibwe. Tell the kids, no. They'd all be scared of her. But she was trying to teach us. We have those old ways that we should really learn from. And Rose said, I think if we did that, we'd be a stronger community. So just kind of listening to our speakers today, one thing that so many of you had in common was that you mentioned your grandmothers. Many of you multiple times. So I heard Grandma Juanita. I mentioned my own grandma, Jeanette Aganash. Deborah mentioned she was named for her grandmothers. Carlene Hunter just said, I couldn't understand why my grandmother was the last to be waited on. Attorney General Wilson Raybould quoted her grandmother on the topic of male hereditary chiefs. Quote, women are too busy and important to be chiefs. So the speakers today, so impressive as we knew they would be, smart, kind, educated, thoughtful, respectful, creative, prodigious work ethic. This is a group of people, a group of incredible women who paid attention to their grandmothers. So, those are my final thoughts today. Do you have any comments or questions? Because we have just 10 minutes or so, and I'll get out of the light a little bit to try to see you out there. Please. I don't know if anyone wants kind of a long question, long comment, observation. And maybe what we should do is talk a little bit during our reception in just a couple of minutes. But if there's anyone, I can't see the audience very well, but is there anyone who wants to talk about the issue of child removal or recommend any sources, especially for reading on this topic? Yeah.
I think the conversation needs to be had. I know we don't have time to talk about it here, unfortunately. There's this whole issue around the Indian Child Welfare Act. There were federal policies put in place to stop what you were talking about in terms of just the gross removal of Indian children from their family. And there is a lot of work to do in that area. Indian Child Welfare Act is continuously being challenged in the courts today, and maybe that is something that is in an area that NMAI may choose to look at, but and we can talk about it, like I said, on kind of offline, but it is a very valid question, and it is something that it is a discussion that we need to continue having, because those protections, those policies, those laws that Native women and Native men fought so hard for are under direct attack currently. So it is time for the reception. So if everyone will please join us outside, and thank you so much for staying until the end.
Yes, thank you.
I just wanted to announce